Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming. I'd like to start out with a few thank yous. First and foremost, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your busy nights during the holiday season to come here and take part of this great session. I'd also like to thank our panelists tonight and also the people behind the scenes that helped put this together. Raymond Baptist Church, Kevin McBride, thank you very much for allowing us to use this facility and also being part of this. Ken Bossy from the New Life Assembly Church, thank you very much. Celeste Clark, Executive Director, Raymond Coalition for Youth, thank you for putting this together. Also, the entire Raymond Coalition for Youth Board of Directors for seeing the insight in putting this project as a priority so that we can move it ahead. So thank you very much. Also, the Seacoast Public Health Network, who has provided or will be providing the Narcan training and everything associated with that, so thank you very much. We also have some special dignitaries that have taken the time to be here tonight and support this. And Senator Regan, thank you very much. This would not be possible in a community our size to have a police department so heavily involved in a coalition if it was not for our town manager's support. Town Manager Craig Wheeler, thank you. And also the Raymond Board of Selectmen. Craig Bemis is here tonight, so thank you for your support as well. And of course, thank you for Walmart for supporting our refreshments, Raymond Area Rotary, and also RCTV for being here tonight and taking time out of your busy nights to make sure that our message goes throughout the entire community. So thank you very much. You know, we want to make sure that folks suffering from addiction and going through the whole recovery process are not alone. And what we want to do here tonight is provide some information. There has been some resource tables out front as you came in tonight, packed with great information about recovery, prevention, all sorts of programs. Please take a few moments, even if it's during the presentation, if you want to slip out and grab some information, please feel free to do that. That information literally is worth its weight in gold. We also want to reduce the stigma associated with addiction. So those are our two goals for tonight. And what I'd like to do is just give a brief presentation of some of the facts surrounding heroin and how it affects our local communities. You know, back last year, there was a very high-profile accident which happened in Candia on Route 101. And it was a 19-year-old lady from Milton, New Hampshire, who moved to the local area, actually Fremont, who had a horrible addiction to heroin and crashed on Route 101. And it was a huge tragedy, and it really opened the eyes to our local area to say, listen, heroin, its effects, its tentacles are in this area. It was Jessica McCaskey. I'm sure most of you have heard the story. She injected heroin and ultimately crashed and passed away on Route 101 last year. And that's a real local story, and it underscores the fact that heroin is throughout every community. It has tentacles that reach far and wide, and its wake of devastation is just incredible. And you'll hear some stories tonight with our panelists, just how bad it is. Next slide. Last year, heroin overdoses, heroin deaths, topped the list, even topped fatalities, motor vehicle fatalities. That was the first time ever. What an amazing statistic. It's sobering, it's eye-opening. That was the first time that that happened. This year, in this slide here, heroin overdoses as of last week had reached 295. That's 295 people in New Hampshire that had passed away from a heroin overdose. That's unbelievable. And that's in November. Last year total was 325 deaths throughout the entire state. Just the other night on Channel 9 WMUR, they ran a program that they are predicting that heroin deaths in New Hampshire are going to hit 357. It's just unbelievable. And here's that video clip that they played on Channel 9.
Ray Brewer joins us live in Concord now with details on two newly released reports. And the news is not good, Ray, is it?
No, Aaron, it's not. There's no getting around it. The news from these reports is grim. The Regional Director of American Medical Responses, New Hampshire, continues on pace to set a record this year for drug-related deaths. The state medical examiner says there have been 295 deaths connected to opioids in 2015. But the projected number of drug-related deaths for this year is expected to hit 357, once some suspected overdose cases are confirmed. That's 31 more fatal drug overdoses than the 326 cases confirmed in 2014.
A significant increase, a very, very large increase in not only the number of heroin overdoses or opiate overdoses, but deaths as well.
183 fatal overdoses this year involved fentanyl. 135 deaths were attributed to fentanyl alone, while 31 deaths were attributed to fentanyl being mixed with heroin.
There's no quality control at the heroin factory. They put anything in that they can, and as has been said before, fentanyl is very easy to make. It's synthetic, doesn't need to be cultivated, and they add that along with the heroin.
The state's largest cities have been hit hard.
For November, between Nashua and Manchester, we've had 101 fatalities in the state that we can attribute to what we believe to be opioid overdoses. And the disturbing part is the amount of Narcan that we have to give these patients is increasing, which means that the heroin or whatever it may be mixed with, if it's fentanyl, is becoming more pure.
There are still another 80 suspected drug overdoses that are awaiting toxicology reports. Reporting live outside the state lab in Concord, Ray Brewer, WMUR News 9.
You know what's amazing about that video when it played? It barely had a ripple. I bet there's somebody, quite a few of you probably didn't even see it. I want to underscore again, they are predicting that 357 people in New Hampshire in 2015 will die as a result of opioids. That is an incredible number, and it's a number that we hope throughout the greater system that we can reduce, and that's part of our effort tonight. Just a little background about opioids. They're on a comeback. They were big back in the 70s, heroin. It pretty much vanished for quite a while, and now it's making a huge comeback. Also in the class of narcotic analgesics, which is the opioid family, are things as morphine, oxycodone, OxyContin, methadone, Demerol. These are all things that are in that family of drugs. One of the drugs used to treat opioid addiction is Suboxone, which can be abused in and of itself. It contains medication that basically blocks the high that an addict will get, and it's widely prescribed. And it's also one of the drugs that in my opinion, has really changed the game when it comes to heroin overdoses is Narcan. And I have a slide here. Next slide. One more. This slide here shows the use of Narcan by month in the state of New Hampshire. And in October, and I know it's very difficult to see, the words are so small, 216 times in New Hampshire Narcan was administered in the month of October. That's 216 times somebody basically stopped breathing from an overdose. So you can imagine those numbers, and let's go back to the 357 predicted deaths from heroin. Can you imagine if this drug did not exist, how many overdoses and deaths we would have in this state? New Hampshire passed a law last year allowing Narcan to be administered from people other than those that were originally included in the law, such as doctors, nurses, paramedics. Now, folks that are trained and will have training tonight will be able to administer that. To me, every time that drug is administered, it's a story that we're not telling. It's a story of a death that we're not telling. So that's a key fact. New Hampshire passed the Good Samaritan law. We were the 29th state to do so. It also contained language that when somebody is overdosing or experiencing an overdose or helping somebody that is experiencing an overdose, If they call the authorities, they become immune from prosecution. So hopefully that triggers folks that are either know somebody present with them, they themselves are overdosing, they will call for help. They no longer have to fear prosecution when doing so. The hopes is that more folks that are overdosing and, or have a friend that are overdosing will in fact call for help. What does Narcan look like? There's a couple of ways to inject it. It can be done nasally through a nasal spray or via needle. Again, the goals for tonight are to reduce the stigma associated with addiction and also connect our community with services. We do have a panel tonight that includes Glenn, who is in long-term recovery, Doug Griffin, who's a father who has lost a child, Ken Gadadian, a paramedic from AMR, Barry Timmerman, clinical director from Seacoast Youth Services, and Holly Sakala, executive director of Hope, New Hampshire. Each panelist will take 5 minutes to explain their sector, and then at the very end we will have a question and answer period. Also, we do have another person in long-term recovery, JJ, who will be stepping up to the podium now. Thank you for coming. With that said, let me get started with our very first panelist, JJ. I'll put you right on the spot.
Hi, my name is JJ. My experience with the drug heroin and Percocets started when I was about 20 years old. It started like most other things. It's just the people you surround yourself with. I didn't experience an overdose myself, but I seen it many times. Not very good at speaking publicly, so I'll keep it short. And
JJ, it may help for those in attendance today, if you could talk a little bit about your experiences here in Raymond and how that led to you becoming an addict, and then the process that led you out of becoming an addict.
Okay. Well, it all started and pretty much ended here in Raymond. I'm not going to name any names, but it's definitely the people I surrounded myself with, and it didn't take long at all. Started hanging out with people, and they introduced me to it, and one thing led to another. Before I knew it, I became an addict. Started with Percocets. Shortly after I started with Percs, I couldn't get them anymore, so I ended up doing heroin. That lasted for a little while, and then I got to a certain point in my life where I wasn't happy with myself. I was living out of my car, and I turned to bad scene real quick, so shortly after that I decided to go to rehab, and that was pretty much it. After that, I had a few incidences where I ended up in jail for a significant amount of time, and that didn't stop me. Pretty much nothing really stopped me for some time. Then I got in the right mindset where I just didn't want to do it anymore. Then I went to rehab, and here I am now, about 8 months clean and sober.
JJ, thank you for sharing your story with us. Glenn, who's also in long-term recovery.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi, everyone. I'm Glenn. Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming tonight. I've been struggling with an opiate addiction for the better part of the last 10 years. It started when I was young, probably 14, 15 years old. I found a bottle of prescription pain pills from a previous injury. I took them all till they were gone and didn't understand why I felt like crap. And then it just kind of dwindled, and it only happened when the occasion brought itself about. I didn't really, seek it out. And then right around when I was 18, 19 years old, that's when I realized that I had a serious problem. And it took me anywhere from 200 to 300 milligrams of OxyContin to get out of bed and feel ready to go to work in the morning. My addiction progressed because I was using the drugs to cope with, how I felt about myself and the judgment passed on by others, people that I knew from previous lives where they see me at the grocery store. And, here I am, 121 pounds, looking like a rock star. And you just get some of the most disgusting, hurtful looks that people can give to another person. It got to the point where I was out committing felonies to support my habit, and I wound up in jail, facing a really, really, really hefty sentence of a mandatory minimum of 20 years for committing an armed robbery and a home invasion in Haverhill. From that point on, I went to jail and I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, that's it, that's enough. I'm not doing this ever again. I look at myself in the mirror and all I see is cheekbones, and that's no way to look at yourself. I found my recovery by, as weird as it sounds, I used to go to the barber shop in jail every single day, whether I could get a haircut or I couldn't. But I just loved the environment, and I learned from it. I learned everything that I could, and when I got out, my biggest sobriety factor was put myself through school to get my barber's license, work a job that I love, and build my life up at 26, 27 years old where I should have been when I was 18. And it never clicked until I started getting the support that I needed. And people started to accept me for who I am and what I was, and I was sick. And getting clean was hands down hardest decision I ever made, but I wouldn't trade it for a million things. And that's pretty much all I've got for you guys.
Glenn, thank you very much. Next, Doug Griffin, father who lost a child. Doug?
Hi, I am Doug Griffin, and we lost our daughter Courtney last year to an overdose. Courtney shouldn't be defined by her addiction because she was such a wonderful kid, and her life was one everybody would just want to have. She traveled around the world. She had everything, and heroin found its way into our house. And she ran into fentanyl, and it took her quickly. She went through the phases that all addicts do of, all of a sudden things start disappearing in your house. And she hit the medicine cabinet, and the story is pretty much the same, whenever you hear it. But I'd like to talk tonight about what happens afterwards. My wife and I took it upon ourselves to get involved to try and help out. And we have a service at our church once a month for addicts and their families, people that have lost kids. And it's a real healing thing. Now we get up to 75 people come, and we have everybody brings something to eat, and we sit around afterwards, and you'd be amazed to see the healing that happens in that room, because there's nowhere to go when you've lost a kid or your kids are addicted. You don't know where to turn, but the church. And here we are. Great place. But you can get involved. Every person, if they feel like there's something wrong, they can get involved. They can go to the State House. They can. I testified for the Narcan bill in both the House and the Senate. I testified for the budget. And you can go and you can actually say something, and you can make a difference if you get involved. I work closely with politicians, both Democratic and Republican, because this is a nonpartisan issue. And to a man, every one of them is trying to do something good for these kids. And we started Project Recovery. We'll be opening a women's sober house in Rockingham County. There isn't a women's sober house now. And if you get a chance to help somebody that's suffering with addiction, whether it be the person or the family, reach out. don't sit back and feel bad for them. You know, don't talk about them. Reach out and help them. Bring them here. Thank you very much.
Doug, I can only imagine the heart break that you must feel each and every day. If you had one thing that you would tell parents who have a child in a stage of addiction, what would that be?
Speak out. My wife and I, we covered her debts. We didn't turn her into the police. We took needles out of her room. And, you know, it was a terrible thing. And when she died, no one knew she was an addict except that those that were very close to us. And we should have come out, you know, and sought help. And if you know someone that's addicted, get them some help. I mean, go to your local policeman and talk to them. They're not a bad guy. Look at him. He's not a bad guy. You know? And you have to do it. You have to do it. If I knew what I know now, she'd be alive.
Yes. So I'm very humbled being here tonight and hearing your stories, and very blessed and happy for you being in recovery, for sure. So I work more on the end of helping those who actually have overdosed. I am a paramedic and field training officer for AMR in Manchester. So there's just a few points, a couple of things that I've learned along the way. I was also a pastor for 20 years before transitioning into the streets as a paramedic. Seems to be much more relevant than much of whatever else I've done for the 20 years. So yes, heroin is highly addictive, illegal, illicit, analgesic drug, and people are addicted. People do overdose. So what is it that we find, and what is it that we do? So we find the overdose victim anywhere. It happens to be anyone, and it really is any time of the day. The places could be in a bathroom, in a restaurant, in a dark basement, in a back alley, and in some of the nicest homes in the city of Manchester. And it could be anyone. So the overdoses, I got some statistics, at least year-to-date, 11/30/2015, in the city of Manchester alone, there were 680 overdose calls, and the ages ran from age 16 to 59. And we've had 85 fatalities in Manchester alone, ages 18 to 69. And there were 1,644.5 milligrams of Narcan that has been given in the city of Manchester. So it's really touching and heartbreaking hearing the story and hearing how it has impacted you. Truly, it does impact families. I've heard moms and dads say there's just too much despair. They feel too helpless. They feel too hopeless, too much dysfunction. And in many cases, there is kind of an epidemic of fatherlessness in the lives of these children whose lives are being destroyed. But also within families, there are great ideas that come forth to help. There's increasing passion to actually get involved, as he said, to help. But there's also a lot of obstruction that's taking place. There's a lot of people that are kind of empty and distracted and maybe don't even care. I'm overwhelmed by the number of people that are here. I pulled in and saw the parking lot, and it's absolutely tremendous that you're here. But also there's a lot of exhaustion out there that obstructs people. Families are tired. Providers like myself are very tired. People are getting burned out. Those who are fighting the good fight in this issue, they really need support. They really need to be strengthened. And there's one thing out there that obstructs, just as a parent, I have 5 children, 4 grandchildren. The thing that made me the most ineffective was hypocrisy in my own life. I remember the commercial that came out in the 80s of some kids snorting cocaine on a coffee table, and the father came busting through the door. "Where did you learn to do that?" And the kid said, "We watched you do it, Dad." And so that can really affect and obstruct the process of helping. And just a few thoughts about strategy. Number one is compassion. Compassion is defined as being moved by the misfortune of others and to sacrificially give yourself up for those that are having misfortune. And that ends up being what love really is all about. Definitive care. Hospital staff need support and they need encouragement, detox, recovery, rehab. And I personally have kind of a vision or a thought of maybe a network of strong families that can open their homes to maybe adopt an addict and their family and to be a safe house. I have no idea how that's going to ever come to pass, but it's just something that keeps ringing in my mind. And also just activating the community by things that are going on here, symposiums, education, task force, and prayer. Prayer is a big deal because God really cares for those that are hurting. Community service, building relationships to those that are poor and homeless, where some of the addicts kind of end up being there. If there's churches or communities that are reaching out, providing meals, providing clothing, and other kinds of services, if you get involved in that, you can build relationships, because really, that's what's really going to do it for people, is relationships that are being built and resources that can go. So those are just a few thoughts, things that I learned, and appreciate being here.
Kim, thank you for sharing that. I just want to let everyone know, if you have questions, there are some white cards that you were provided. Please take the time to jot them down, and we'll have staff walk around in a few moments as we begin to get towards the end of the panel discussion, so that we can hopefully have the panel, depending on who your question is aimed at, answer any questions that you folks may have. Our next panelist, Barry Timmerman, Clinical Director, Seacoast Youth Services.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to see the turnout. Appreciate you giving up your time to be here. It helps reduce the stigma. That's one of the biggest issues for people getting help. One way that I try to reduce stigma is I out myself. I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means is that I haven't used any alcohol or other drugs for 33 years. Mm-hmm. And the reason that I was able to be successful at that was because of treatment and recovery support services. When I got clean and sober, there was a lot more treatment available than there is today. And what's ironic is, even though I lived in Massachusetts, I got treatment in New Hampshire. So, go figure. I work at Seacoast Youth Services. We're located in Seabrook. We provide a number of clinical programs and outreach programs for youth and their families. One thing in particular we do is we have the only co-occurring intensive outpatient program for teenagers in southern New Hampshire. So keep that in mind if you have a kid that's looking for some help. I want to talk a little bit about treatment tonight. There's some key points about treatment that I'd like to make before I talk about the different kinds of treatment that people can avail themselves of. Treatment is just the beginning of the recovery process. It's not the end all. What's absolutely crucial are recovery support services. And that's something that's been lacking. And we really need to advocate and provide the means for more recovery support services to happen. Because you can go to a 28-day rehab program, but what happens when a person gets out of 28-day rehab is key to them being able to sustain their recovery. It's really important. Medicaid expansion is hopefully coming in January, but it's a blessing and a curse at the same time. What that means is a lot more people will be able to pay for substance use disorder treatment. The unfortunate news is that the current treatment system in New Hampshire can't even support people now, never mind the numbers of people that will be on Medicaid rolls come January 2016. So I'm going to encourage everybody to advocate to your representatives and legislators for more treatment. So what is treatment? Well, there's various levels of it. The first level is early intervention, and that's usually a type of a treatment where you're providing education to somebody that's kind of at the very beginning of the risk factors that might lead to a substance use disorder. Then comes outpatient services. Outpatient services is when you go see a licensed counselor once a week for an hour to work on the identified issues that brought you to that counselor. It could be a substance use disorder or other things as well. In my almost 30 years of working with adolescents, I've rarely seen a kid that didn't have more than one issue going on. There's usually lots of things going on for kids other than just using. The next level of care is intensive outpatient, and that's kind of like outpatient counseling on steroids. So kids will come, or adults would come to the program 3 to 4 times a week for several hours, and they would participate in groups, individual counseling, and there's usually a family component that goes along with that as well. There's partial hospitalization, which is a much more intensive level of service, where a person goes to a hospital setting where they have access to medical monitoring. And that, again, is the same. It's 3 to 4 times a week, probably more like 3 to 4 hours a day. There's more time involved in that. Then we start to get into your residential types of treatment. And usually somebody that's addicted to opiates needs to be detoxed, and they need to be medically monitored to help them get through that very difficult period of time. For some people, they get through it in 24 to 48 hours. Other people, it takes longer. There's something called post-acute withdrawal syndrome that occurs as well. So a person can think they're past the worst of it, and then they'll encounter these post-acute withdrawal syndrome symptoms that can happen for up to 2 years after they get into recovery. The levels of residential treatment go from 28-day residential treatment that's non-medical, and then there's medically monitored and medically supervised and so forth. And how the decision gets made for what type of treatment a person needs is based on 6 areas that we look at. One area is what's their risk for withdrawal symptoms. The second dimension is their medical issues. Do they have any serious medical issues? We look at emotional and behavioral issues and how serious they might be. We look at a person's readiness to change. Are they acknowledging a problem, and are they ready to get into treatment and work on it? We look at their relapse potential. Do they have a history of not having success at treatment in the past? And then finally, we look at their recovery and living environment. And we really want to look at, do they have a safe place to go home to when they get out of treatment? Okay, you can put that stuff together. So the decision for what level of treatment is based on evaluating all of those 6 areas. Ideally, it's a great system, but welcome to New Hampshire. There's only, I've counted them today, there's only 7 28-day residential programs in New Hampshire right now. Back in the 90s, there was 50. So let's get on the phone to our representatives, and thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Our next panelist, Holly I was going to ruin
It's
one of
Sakala.
these.
That's good.
Executive Director of Hope, New Hampshire.
Hi, folks. My name is Holly Sakala, and I am also a person in recovery. About 13 years ago, I became a survivor of substance use disorder, and I've been in remission ever since. And how I did that, was a number of things. Treatment, continued support. I'm a big faith-based kind of recovery gal, so church, faith, those kinds of things have helped me in my recovery. In these times, faith and churches can be a big supporter of recovery efforts and recovery support. It's kind of like when Martin Luther King called out to reduce stigma, he called on the faith leaders. These are things that we need to do for our communities, to keep our communities together. That's what church is. Church means community. So I'm glad we're having this conversation here about stigma. I don't introduce myself as an addict or a former alcoholic. That is stigmatizing to the self for me. I'm a mother. I'm a continued student. I'm a director of Recovery Community Center. A lot of things. I'm also a person that's in remission from substance use disorder. My addiction started with Jack and Coke in those orders, right? And then I hit a pole and broke my neck and my back in 6 places and collapsed the lung and did the coma thing and left the hospital with a morphine pump. And then the morphine pump went away, and then the pills came. And, then I detoxed in a campground because I lost my home, my family, everything. But I didn't lose my God, so I picked up my boots, went to treatment, got some help, and, moved forward. The thing is in New Hampshire we have such a climate where you have zero capacity for treatment. I mean, treatment providers are so taxed right now. Recovery supports are so needed, just like you mentioned. You have very, very few adolescent programs. It's just non-existent. So I did mention that I run recovery community centers. We do a lot of stigma talk. We can all play a part in the reduction of stigma by the words we choose to use. I don't label people that way. People say, oh, I've been clean for this amount of time. Well, I'm pretty sure I took a shower this morning, and I'm clean every day. So those kind of words, think about how you're talking to people and talking about people. They're not just addicts. They're friends, family, sisters, brothers, sons, daughters. They're people with substance use disorder, right? Families have a challenging time coming out about this. A lot of times we hide it until the point where help can't be found, and we're calling our funeral director and our reverend to say a sermon. It doesn't need to be that way. When you come to church and you say, oh, my child came down with leukemia, you've got a church gathering around you to support you, throw spaghetti dinners, support you while you're going through the treatment with that child. It's not the same in society for people that have children with substance use disorder. And we need to be thinking about that. Why is it? We don't call people canceritic. Oh, I was canceritic and now I'm not. We just don't do that. It's a chronic condition that you can recover from. And treatment, recovery supports, they're very essential. So in Manchester, we've opened the Hope Recovery Community Center. We're looking to open more of those centers, obviously, because they're needed. We've already seen over 1,600 people come through the doors. 200 of those are family members looking for help, looking for access to treatment, looking for information, Narcan trainings, employment services, support groups. We've got support groups, everything from faith-based groups to 12-step fellowships to yoga, art groups, LGBT groups, you name it. And I try to pack it into that center because addiction touches everyone. It is something that, even the strongest of soldiers that comes back from war, right? They could beat a bullet, they could beat a tank, but they can't beat addiction or PTSD. They need help. So I would call out all the faith communities and say whatever you can do in your community, in your church, to help support people's recovery. We're in a good place to start the conversation. So anything Hope for New Hampshire can do to help you get educated or educate somebody else or get that help that you need to just reach out and find out what's going on or how can I help this, then our doors are open. Hopefully we'll go 24/7 in a couple of weeks, but I still have to fight a few legislators for that. All right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before I open it up for questions and answers by the panelists, I'd like to take a moment just to go over again our table resources that we had out there tonight. For those folks that are here and perhaps those folks that are watching, if you want to jot down this information. For those here, if you want to step out after the presentation during some of the questions and answers and grab some information. They are Celebrate Recovery, Faster, Hope for New Hampshire, Lamprey Healthcare, Road, Live Free Recovery, and RCFY, Raymond Coalition for Youth. I'd like to kick off the question and answer period with a few questions that I have. And my first one is for JJ, and it talks a little bit about some of the collateral damage that heroin has in communities. JJ, how easy was heroin to obtain or illicit substances in our community?
After a certain period, it became very easy. I started getting it here in town, and then I cut all that out and just started going right down to Mass.
Was it readily available?
On a daily basis, yeah.
One other question for JJ. How did most of the addicts support themselves through the addiction process in terms of buying the heroin or illicit substances?
Few of them maintained their addiction through their daily jobs, but most of them didn't really have much of a job. Whatever they did have for a job, they're spending all of it on the substance and doing other things, criminal activity, to support it.
Thank you. Glenn, I'd ask the same question of you.
So what was the first question?
The same question. How readily available was illicit substances in the community?
Oh,
and how did most folks support
it's
that?
so easy you wouldn't believe. That's probably the scariest thing about it is, I mean, the way I look at my sobriety is the only thing that stops me from getting high and relapsing when I walk out that door is myself. Because no matter where you turn, there it is. It's not just the teenagers anymore. It's the businessmen, the stay-at-home soccer moms. It's everybody. And when it's used by that many people, it's got to be available when people want it.
Great, thank you. Ken, question for you. In terms of this epidemic taking resources away from other areas, as a paramedic, how often do you respond? Was it every shift to an overdose? And what is that tapping the resources that you provide to Manchester?
Pretty much every shift. We have 4 dedicated 911 ambulances and then several other ALS transfer trucks. And there are multiple overdose calls that everybody goes on. I spoke in Manchester once and came in to speak, and one of the men said, "Boy, you set a record tonight." And today, and I'm like, "What do you mean?" "Well, you had 6 overdoses in a row or something like that." And so I didn't even know that. I was just kind of working the shift, and it's becoming so commonplace. So when we go to an overdose, the law enforcement comes, the fire department comes, and then the ambulance comes. So you have, at least 10 people sometimes that are there working to resuscitate. But as far as, there are 10 people that can be diversified going other places. So, yeah.
Great, thank you.
So there is a stretch on the resources.
Thank you very much. If any folks have any questions, you can either hold your card up and we'll grab them, or if you'd like to walk up to the front, we can do that. Or if you have a very loud voice, we can hit you from the audience. Sir?
Hold on, so we can pick you up on TV. And we asked you no novel questions, and I'll keep the mic at all times.
Okay, thanks, Ken. I'd like to ask the recovering addicts, if I know somebody, or if I come across somebody that I feel like, they got a problem, what's the best action I can take?
That's a great question.
I think that the best action that you can take is be as non-judgmental and as accepting as you can. Because if it's hard for somebody on the other side of the fence to approach that subject, imagine how it feels to be the person with that problem. And like I said, if you're accepting, it's going to come out easier. There's going to be less of an argument. There's going to be more of a, all right, okay, well, maybe I'll be willing to work with you since you weren't so, derogatory and in my face about it. I mean, that's what worked for me, is somebody just saying, hey, look, I see that you've got a problem. I'm not judging. I just think that you need help. And that's all it took for me to reach out and take that person's hand and start, 4.5 years later in my sobriety journey.
Educate yourself about recovery resources and treatment resources. So if you encounter somebody that's experiencing a substance use disorder, you know, you can lead them in the right direction, or at least point them in the right direction. You know, and sometimes people aren't ready to jump right into a treatment program, but they might be willing to go to an HA meeting or an NA meeting or an AA meeting. So if you know where those are in the local area, then you can point that person in that direction. And you may also, you know, develop some relationships with people that are in recovery, so that you could call that person and there's a possibility that them and somebody else could do a 12-step call. That can sometimes produce some pretty amazing results.
Thank you. Any other panelists have any comments on that?
You could definitely bring him to help for a cup of coffee and a conversation.
That's great. Next question.
Yeah, I've heard from some speakers that we've had in the past that there were times when they were ready for help and they did something that would get attention, and yet it didn't happen. Can you guys, JJ and Glenn, talk about that, where you reached out and it didn't happen, but you were ready for some help?
Great question.
Me personally, I haven't had that situation. When I was ready, I just went straight to rehab. That's me personally, but every story is different.
When our daughter finally decided she was ready for help, we found our insurance wouldn't cover it. And we spent 100 hours in different hospitals and waiting rooms trying to negotiate a safe haven for our daughter. And the state of New Hampshire, just a year ago, was in a lot worse condition than it is now, because people are listening. And people are listening because they're gathering in groups like this. And I think now if someone wants help and they reach out, I think that there are people that will help them.
I just have one thing about that. They're ready, they're not ready. These are people with a chronic condition. Not everyone with a chronic condition is ready to stop eating cake because they have diabetes. But we don't say, well, until you're ready to stop eating cake, we're not going to give you any insulin. So I think if we think in those terms, that if you are there, somebody can recognize that, you kind of go, maybe you hit a meeting, maybe you go get some information. I don't think we should wait till somebody's ready to make a change or make an investment in their health. So I just want to be a little bit clear about that whole piece. It's tough to judge whether people have minimal investment in their health or larger investment in their health. And I think until they do want to make a full investment, that's why our doors stay open. So maybe they're trying a little bit. We're still going to keep the door open. Just like I said, because we don't stop, people with diabetes from getting insulin because they're not ready to stop the sweets. So I think I would just be careful with that they're not ready piece. We can always intervene somehow, some way.
Readiness to change, the way we deal with that in the treatment world is we have this wonderful thing called motivational interviewing, where we ask people questions in such a way that we elicit from them the discrepancies between what they want and what they're not getting. So they tell us what they want, and then from there we begin to help them develop their own internal motivation to begin to change. And so it doesn't matter where somebody is in that process. If we all waited until people were ready to change, all we'd be doing is going to funerals, not helping people.
Thank you. Another question?
Hi, I'm a registered nurse and I work for a family practice primary care, and I'm just wondering what we can do to make an impact. I'm actually speaking tomorrow about this, and we want to do something different to make a bigger impact, so if you have any advice.
Great question. Which panelist would like to go first? Holly?
What can primary, oh, I'm loud, sorry. What can, so you're a nurse in a primary care practice, right? You could talk about it, right? You could say, hey, you could do the early expert. You can do the expert. How much do you drink? Did your father drink? You can ask these questions and have open conversations about it. You can be educated about treatments that are outside of primary care, like treatment, long-term, intensive outpatient treatment, medicated assisted treatment. You could be educated about 12-step fellowships, support groups, mental health services. That's how you can really help, is to get your staff open to have the conversation, be open to receive the information that an addiction might be going on, and be prepared to offer resources for that person to access. That's what I think you could do the best way to help.
About 10 years ago, there was a wonderful initiative in New Hampshire called the Adolescent Treatment Initiative. It was funded for 5 years. And what they did was brilliant. They put licensed alcohol and drug counselors in primary care settings. So when somebody came in with an issue, doctors were trained through SBIRD or through CRAFT, which are different instruments used. They're just quick screening instrument. And when they flag somebody that might potentially have a substance use disorder, they'd introduce them to the LADAC, who was right there in the office. So you get the ball rolling that way. If there's a way to make that happen within your budget, go for it. Make it happen.
Next question.
Hi. Are you familiar with the movie The Hungry Heart, which is about Vermont? And every school system in Vermont has to show that movie. I can't remember when, but it was offered and was shown in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I think only one school in the area showed it. I was told that Exeter High School, Portsmouth High School said there was not a drug problem, and they didn't show it. And it's a devastating movie. It's a wonderful movie. If you have the opportunity to show it anywhere, it's exceptional.
Just so that we can grab the name of that movie. What is the name of that movie again?
The Hungry Heart. The Hungry Heart.
Great, thank you.
We also showed the Anonymous People movie in various places. Hope for New Hampshire has been showing the Anonymous People all over the place. It's a great documentary about people in recovery, advocacy, kind of teaches the scope of those things. So that's also a great movie, but Hungry Heart is a great tool.
And what we were told, every school system in the state of Vermont has to see that movie.
Yeah. Vermont's got a great recovery network. Thank you.
That's some great information, and I myself have not heard of that movie, so it's something that we can definitely follow up on. Thank you. Next question back there, sir. Yeah, you don't need it.
TV needs it. I love what I'm hearing on the recovery side, because obviously there's a great need for it, because so many people have already taken that step into the addicted side, or the substance disorder side, I guess is the word I should be using. How about the... it troubles me to hear that both the guys up there that had the issue had such easy access. So my question, at least on the supply side, is, are we making any dent from a law enforcement side of things on making it a little less easy? And if there's so many people out there that are using it or in recovery, can we use some of those guys to tell us where the stuff is so we can just sweep it up a little bit? Or just simple-minded answer, but I'm just asking what the supply side, what's happening with that?
Great, thank you. And I was actually, a little bit later in the program, I was going to address the availability in terms of the street level. What we're finding in law enforcement is we can't arrest our way out of this. The drug is so prevalent right now, it's difficult to really get a handle on. What we're seeing is addicts are becoming so addicted to the substance that they find it easier to begin to deal it themselves to support their own habit. So the addicts, the drug dealers of yesterday that, in the Miami Vice days that you saw driving fast cars and living in big houses, that's not what we're seeing anymore. In fact, what we're seeing is the dealers are the addicts themselves. And interestingly enough, this cycle is producing its own. The dealers themselves have their habits. They're ending up overdosing, passing away, and the users that they were supplying take their place. So it's very difficult. They change rapidly. The other problem that we're having is there's no more town lines anymore. There's no more city lines. Our addicts are going out getting it. Addicts are coming to town getting it. It's difficult to track. We're bound by the jurisdictional issues that we have. We're bound by the size of the police department that we have. These dealers aren't. They move readily, they move quickly, they adapt. It's difficult. I'd like to say that we're making a dent. I really don't see that, but it's worth its weight to tell you we're doing everything we can. Next question. Oh, sorry about that.
No, I just wanted to say quickly that, this issue that you just brought up about, why don't we stop the supply? They've been trying that for 40 or 50 years. It doesn't work. What we have to do is we have to come at it from the other end. We have to come at it from the treatment end and the recovery support end. We have to help people with addiction get into recovery so that there's no supply and demand. Because people, when they become addicted, when that cerebral cortex gets hijacked, if there's not their drug of choice around, they're going to be absolutely driven to seek out anything to satisfy what that addicted part of their brain is driving them to satisfy. So that's what we need to help.
Well, I also think we need to begin intense education with these kids at a younger age. I think that there's a generation now that wasn't properly educated about drugs, because it's attacking a certain age group now. I know there's from a great variance of age, but I personally deal with kids that are in their early to mid 20s, and it just seems to be, I don't know whether they didn't listen or they didn't have that education or what it is, but we could start very early in the 4th grade or 3rd grade or something and properly educate these kids to stay away from this stuff. And even whether we're working the supply side or the demand side, we can educate these kids and start trying to let them know that it will kill them. Because if they knew that it would kill them going in, maybe they wouldn't start.
I believe substance use prevention should start in Lamaze class.
I need one comment about the supply is probably that it's not just illicit drugs that initiate addiction, right? We need more education for our medical community, our prescribers. If you're leaving the dentist with a 30-day supply of Percocet, you might want to reconsider that, because within 4 days, that 5th day, you're going to feel foolish. We need to educate people when we do hand them the prescriptions. Prescription monitoring programs can help put a dent in the supply piece, right? So these are all things that can help, officers who are completely inundated at both ends. We can fix it from that side as well. We can do our best to get a handle on, legal opiates that are being used to initiate addiction.
Another question.
Can I ask it?
I'm going to practice non-stigmatization. So it's JJ and Glenn. I just want to let you know I'm happy that you're well. I was wondering what kind of programs there are. I'm aware of a young man in another school area in another part of the state whose mom is addicted to heroin, and so he has to witness this. He's in high school, and so his mom's sick, right? That's what's going on, right? And if she was sick with cancer, like you said, everybody would be so important to this kid, but this poor kid's by himself. So is there any support groups? Is there anything, that, we can maybe point him to, or he can, be with some other kids that are kind of suffering the same thing, and to help him so he's just not by himself?
They have Al-Anon meetings, and basically any NA or AA or HA or Al-Anon meetings he can go to, and they will help him deal with that and cope with his situation, and hopefully eventually he can get his mother to one of them too.
It might help if he saw a counselor and talk about it. I work with lots of kids like that. Most of my caseload is kids that are living in families where there's addiction, and they have a safe place to come and talk about it and learn some coping skills and learn that they didn't cause it, they can't control it, and they can't cure it. But they can certainly learn to take care of themselves and not enable, and and develop their own support system. And they can make different choices. That's really the bottom line, because somebody that's growing up in an addicted family system is at higher risk for developing addiction themselves. It's not a given, but the risk is there because of what they're exposed to environmentally. So we have to teach kids to make better choices, that it is a choice.
Yeah, I mean, there's also Smart Recovery for family and friends. So Smart Recovery is just a different program. We offer that at Hope. There's Learn to Cope groups that anyone is welcome to go as a family member. You can go, and we have some great information to teach people, how to deal with these things, how to get help, maybe how to get some counseling. So that might be a good idea. And then if you have a warm and welcoming church, you could also reach out to that. Those are the kinds of things I would suggest. But there are there's not a lot of supports for adolescents at this time. I think we have 3 adolescent coaches, kids under 18, that have gone through the recovery coach training that can, give some guidance, and they do peer groups. But, on that side, it's a difficult situation. It's not often that high schools open up and talk about drug use, and it's kind of unfortunate because you could really do some great intervention and prevention stuff there, just like you said, not just for the child that's using drugs, but also the child that needs to educate his parent that the parent needs help, right?
Two questions from cards. First one is, how young is too young to attend support groups for children with parents affected by addiction? So that's the first one. So how young is too young?
I worked in the Nashua community for 18 years, and for all 18 years I ran a program in all 12 elementary schools called Straight Talk, and it was a group for kids that were identified as living in a home where somebody had an addiction. And I worked with kids from 2nd grade all the way through 6th grade. I didn't put the 2nd graders in with the 6th graders, but I would do 2nd and 3rd graders, 4th and 5th graders, and then 6th graders. And there is no too young. If they're old enough to talk, if they're old enough to be aware. I've done family counseling sessions where, everybody's sitting there in the family therapy session. The elephant in the living room is that there's an adult in the family with a substance use disorder, but they're always there for another reason, and it's always the 5-year-old kid who goes, hey, you know what the problem is? My daddy drinks too much.
Captain Obvious.
Another question is that some family members seem to prefer the company of those who feed their addiction. So the question is, what can a family do to encourage or assist in helping a person who wants to get out of the situation? And what's available to do that locally, not Manchester, Nashua, Portsmouth, but what's available locally to help someone in that situation?
I'm drawing a blank for resources like that in this town, other than your local prevention provider or your public health provider. That's part of the problem, unless, Celeste, do you have ideas?
That's our next part of it.
There you go. There you go.
Do we have another question?
Somebody could share the numbers of users, specifically heroin users, and maybe the different age groups in either this community or Rockingham County or the state, just so that we can kind of get an idea how bad of a problem it really is.
Not just in Manchester. I I built recovery centers in Rhode Island, and the youngest we ever saw was 11, and the oldest we ever saw was 83. So the range of age group is it doesn't have a fixed piece. In Manchester specifically, I think we've seen probably the largest demographic that comes in and utilizes the services are from 18 to 27. That's a huge age group. So they've left high school, they don't have the student assistant program, they don't have those pieces, and they may not even be on their parents' insurance, right? So the access to treatment is a little bit off. So that age group, I would say, is really at a high risk. That's in my opinion.
It's a difficult statistic to gather because unless a person goes to a treatment center and self-reports, it's difficult data to gather. I would say that if you look at the New Hampshire prison system and count the number of prisoners in the New Hampshire prison system, I'd say about 90% of them are there for a substance use related problem. You know, they either committed a crime while under the influence or they committed a crime to provide themselves with the substance they were addicted to.
Next question.
I'm a mom of a 5-year-old, and I'm doing my best to age appropriately educate him. But are there any programs that's going to be coming into our schools? He's in kindergarten. I mean, I'm cool with starting him off in kindergarten. He's known the word addiction for a while, but I mean, the younger the better, I see it. So anything coming to our schools?
Well, I think part of the problem is health class is only mandated in 22 states, I believe. So health class for students on a high school level is only mandated in 22 states. So if you have programs being defunded, like after-school programs, health programs, things like this, you actually increase the risk of the young people not knowing how to care for their health. So prevention services within the high schools are really, they're desperately needed. And the more after-school programs that get cut, and the more music programs that get cut, and the more we take away those finances from building our children up, the more we put them at risk. So education is key, and if you can work with your teacher, maybe some community members, bring the program to them. If it can't be funded, maybe it can be done by volunteer work.
Well, I know this guy right here, we've been going to schools and we've been giving them education and doing presentations, but it's pretty hard to just get into schools and it's free to the school.
Oh, yeah.
And
It's very difficult.
It's ridiculous. I mean, they got to look at it like, look at our state now, and these are the kids whose parents are having a problem. Don't we want to make sure they don't have that problem?
Any help I can be, you can knock on my door, I'll join the fight.
Next question, sir.
I'll stand up. Kudos to Doug up there. He mentioned prevention. This is a problem. It's here now. It's like immigration, all right? I volunteered for Raymond Coalition because I heard there was a heroin problem out here. The problem is here. I haven't heard much about prevention, and you mentioned the key, education. These are not nice guys, pushers. Peer pressure. You know, if you're approached by some dude, what to do? I mean, these are skills that can be taught, you know. I'm in recovery myself. I got 24 years in the AA club. And what I heard was, when I first went in, I felt bad about myself. I wasn't proud of what I was doing, but the old boys made me feel worse. They said, shut up, you don't know anything, sit down and listen. I got humbled. And these guys were sober, and I wasn't. So I listened to them, and bingo, I got 24 years. I don't see that today. I don't see that humility. I don't hear that. You know, you have to bottom out, and you have to want this. You have to want to get off drugs, want to get off booze. And somebody said, how do you, family member, it's called an intervention. My nephew had it. He was drinking cases of beer, you know, nobody knew. They found out, and bam, the family got together, and he went to a rehab. Rehabs work for the body. If you're not ready, they don't work for the mind.
You know, if I could,
somebody want to respond?
I just want to address the question.
A key here. You know?
Thanks.
You know, sir, tonight is one of those efforts that are underway in Raymond for prevention. The Raymond Coalition for Youth, the town of Raymond, the Raymond School District is committed to prevention. And just putting on a forum like this with panelists such that we have is a great step in that direction. So thank you for bringing that up. There's a great movement underway in Raymond and many other communities in the state because I think folks realize that prevention, recovery are the key to success. I do need to move to our next step in the program. What are the next steps in the community? We have several folks that would like to speak and address some things that they have. But before I do that, I just want to thank our panelists, and they will be here for a few more moments. What an amazing group of folks, some unbelievable stories, some great insight that they have shared with all of us tonight, and just unbelievable. Thank you very much for coming tonight. What I really want to underscore with these folks, especially those that have shared their personal stories of addiction and loss, is the fact that they're everyday folks from our area, from our community. It's just, it underscores the prevalence of this issue. I'd also like to say that, getting back to our theme about the stigma, each and every one of us is somebody special in somebody's eyes. And so isn't that addict. And we want to make sure that we reduce the stigma, we pass the word so that these addicts feel comfortable and can get help. And we can connect them if they come forward. It might not be an end-all. We don't have the magic bullet, but we can surely connect them with services that will help. What are the next steps? I'd ask Kevin McBride to speak briefly.
I'll be brief, and I just thank everyone for being here and for us being able to say now the genie is out of the bottle, and we need to be talking about this as a community, and I just thank everyone for doing that. As a pastor, my heart tugs not just for those who are struggling through their recovery, but for the family and friends who are surrounding that person and trying to help them and feeling powerless in doing so. So one of the things we are looking to do starting in January here at Raymond Baptist is to start a support group for family and friends of those who are struggling through the recovery process. Because there are so many who are afraid to say anything or embarrassed to say anything, and they need a safe place to come to support one another, to find some hope, to find some treatment, to find some resources available to them. So starting in January, we'll be offering that program here at the church, again, and getting that word out for those who you may think that would be of importance to. And I also want to call attention to two things. On the resource table out there, for me, is also as a community having a common message. So we've created just some little window stickers which just simply say, we are committed to a drug-free Raymond. And I would challenge businesses especially to take one. If you need more, call the church, we'll get them for you. Stick them up in your windows so we have a common message in our town to say, not here, not now, that we stand in this together. And that was it.
Thank you. Our next speaker would like to touch briefly about bringing recovery to Raymond. Ken Bossy.
Good evening, everybody. So I pastor New Life Assembly of God Church here in Raymond, New Hampshire, and we have a desire in our hearts to start an HA meeting in our church, and I've already contacted HA. We've got all the materials that we need. I've already got 4 volunteers committed. Glenn, who used to go to our church, we have to work on that, by the way. He's going to help out. He has volunteered to help out, and so appreciate that. But I just want to say something. Kin is a longtime friend of mine and was able to give me 2 times at riding on an ambulance in Manchester. And on one of the calls where we brought a patient to CMC, there was also a person there that had just been revived. And this guy was laying on a gurney, and he was talking on a phone to someone, maybe his girlfriend, and he was laughing, and he was joking, and he was saying he didn't do heroin, which he had done because he was revived by Narcan, and it only works on an opiate. And it flashed a picture in my mind of a story of scriptures where Israel sinned against God, and a plague broke out, and God said, have the priests take the fire censers and to stand before the plague as it was going through the community. And they stood there, and there was a scripture specifically that said they stood between the dead and the living. And when I was looking at that guy, realizing that just 20 minutes later, he was dead, and now he was living. And how when an addict abuses their body, how they are rolling the dice every time with the very life that God gave them. And so that's one of the reasons that we want to get involved to help people. We've lost people in our church to heroin overdose, and so we want to step it up. But I just want to say something else. We talk about all of the faith base, and I heard it mentioned again and again, churches and prayer and community and support. And that's wonderful downstream dealing with the issue. But isn't it, as a culture and as a society, isn't it really hugely irresponsible and hypocritical for us to say you cannot have a Bible in school, you cannot have 10 Commandments in school, you cannot mention the name of Jesus in school, but when you become an addict, you can go to a 12-step program and we'll teach you how to find a higher power that will bring you out of your addiction. And that really is the fountainhead that we need to start focusing on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Celeste Clark, Executive Director, Raymond Coalition for Youth, The Importance of Prevention.
Good evening, everybody. A special thank you to all of you for coming. And I'm not a wonderful speaker who speaks on a microphone every weekend, so bear with me. I'm the director of the Raymond Coalition for Youth, and all of this happens because of the partnerships that we have and everything that is the Raymond Coalition for Youth. So thank you all for being a part of our great coalition. We are a drug-free community grantee, and what that means is we work to reduce access to substances, like the gentleman asked. So we have some systems in place working with the police department to do that, and increase awareness. And this evening tonight is all about increasing awareness and talking with people in the community and getting the word out. As these 2 young gentlemen mentioned, this is in our community. They went to Raymond schools, graduated from Raymond schools. They live this. Our kids are in these school systems now. We need to be aware that this is here and this is an issue and we need to work on it together. It's not going to take the police department or the churches or the schools or parents by themselves. All of us really need to rally around this. One of the steps we're working on right now is changing attitudes. I think that was discussed a few times. We just did a Not Everyone's Doing It campaign with the students at the high school. This was a peer-led campaign that our youth action group worked on. And it was Not Everyone's Doing It. 76% of Raymond High School students are not smoking pot. That was the message. They used data. They collected the data. They put this on shirts. It wasn't very well received by some of the adults in the community. The kids embraced it. The kids walked around the schools with black shirts on, with the words on their back supporting this. They need adults supporting them with these efforts that they're putting forward. When we talk to kids, as Barry mentioned, it comes out pretty readily where the problems some of our kids are experiencing. Adult role models, what's the messages that are being sent to our kids? So that's something the coalition is really working on. As far as the school's concerned, their state has just implemented a model school policy. I've shared it with our school principals and the superintendent. There are 5 steps to take to address drug awareness in the schools. Our school is doing really well. Part of it is collecting the youth risk behavior survey that we do. There's another program called The Life of an Athlete that is implemented at our high school. That's where anybody who's engaged in a sports team has to sign a contract. Their parents have to sign a contract, signing up for 365 days a year that they pledge not to use any drugs. And instead of a punishment, if they do experiment with drugs, we have steps in place to help get them services. So they won't be punished only, they'll be given a step to getting well. I'm not sure that that's all. There's a whole bunch the coalition does. David is the chairman of the coalition, and there are several other board members in the room. I thank all of them for their continued involvement. We have monthly coalition meetings where this subject came up that we needed to do something. Our partners in the community came to us and said we need to address this issue, so the coalition rallied around that and made tonight happen. I'm just going to go to my next thing because I addressed the Next Step Forum. We want outcomes from tonight, and Ken and Kevin both talked about outcomes that we want to see happening in our community to support our community. We also are committed to having another forum just like this. It's going to be in February. It's going to be here. In your packets is a little piece of paper that you can, if you have a way you want to get involved in any of the efforts that we said, that your information will be collected on this paper only. So you can sign up for that. But the next forum on your evaluation sheet, which is the yellow sheet, tell us what you want to hear. We work together with our partners to bring these efforts into the community. We want to give you what you want, what you're looking for. So those, there are a few suggestions on there. I also wrote down, we have access to bring the Hungry Heart in and anonymous people. We can do a showing here. We obviously have a screen to do it, so that would work out well. If you're interested in those movies, put that down on your sheet. That's something that we can look to bring into the community. And that's it.
Excellent, thank you. Just as I wrap up, I want to again thank our panelists. I want to thank everybody involved in putting tonight together. And I forgot to mention earlier, thank you to Pam Turcott and Jen Darius for all of your work, the Raymond Coalition for Youth staff. I'd ask that you take a moment to fill out any of these eval sheets and turn them in. And one of the things that I'd like to say is we are interested in launching a Raymond task force to help move this issue forward. If you are at all interested in being involved in that, please make a note at the bottom of this eval. Leave your either telephone number or email address so that we can contact you and begin the process. We've developed a website so that we can move some of the information out to the general public here in Raymond. And we'd like to start a task force to assist us in doing that, and also to continue getting our message across. Now, as we wrap up, next downstairs there'll be free Narcan training where you can be trained on using Narcan, and you'll be given a kit yourself. Please take advantage of that. For those folks that may know an addict, may know somebody that has an addict in their family, a friend, a relative, it's a great opportunity to receive that training. Thank you very much for coming tonight. The tables are still out in the lobby. I'd like also to thank our table resource sponsors tonight. Thank you very much for bringing the information. Thank the panelists again, and have a good night.